The sky had been threatening all day, but Christopher Columbus Slaughter had seen threatening skies before. At 45, he'd weathered more storms than most men twice his age, both literal and metaphorical. The cattle were restless. Their low bellowing carried on the increasingly fierce wind that swept across the vast Texas plains. CC stood on the porch of his ranch house, his weathered hands gripping the wooden railing as he surveyed his empire. 23 years of back-breaking work had built this, 15,000 head of prime cattle, more land than a man could ride across in a day, and a reputation that stretched from San Antonio to Fort Worth. But something about this storm felt different. The air itself seemed to vibrate with an ominous energy that made his skin crawl. Tom Bradley, his loyal foreman, approached with hurried steps, his hat pulled low against the driving wind. "Boss, we need to get the cattle to lower ground. This ain't looking good." CC nodded grimly, his steel-gray eyes scanning the horizon where lightning flickered like the devil's own lantern. "Get the boys moving! Take them to the south pasture, away from the creek bed." As if summoned by his words, the storm unleashed its fury. Rain came down in torrents, not the gentle precipitation that nourished the land, but violent sheets of water that seemed intent on washing away everything in their path. The wind howled like a banshee, bending trees nearly horizontal and sending debris flying through the air like missiles. CC fought his way to the barn, his boots slipping in the mud that had formed within minutes. Inside, he could hear the horses whinnying in terror, their hooves thundering against their stalls. The storm raged for hours, and with each passing minute, CC felt pieces of his life's work being torn away. Through the cracked barn door, he watched in horror as his prized bulls were scattered like leaves, driven by winds that seemed to have a malevolent intelligence. The creek that had been a gentle trickle that morning was now a raging torrent, carrying away fencing, equipment, and anything else in its path. When dawn finally broke, an eerie silence settled over the devastated landscape. CC emerged from the barn to find his world transformed into something unrecognizable. Where once stood neat fences and orderly pastures, now lay a wasteland of mud, debris, and destruction. His cattle were gone, scattered to the four winds, and his heart sank as he realized the magnitude of what he'd lost. It was then that he saw her. A figure emerged from the morning mist, moving with a grace that seemed almost ethereal against the backdrop of destruction. She was young, perhaps 20, with long dark hair that clung to her soaked dress, and eyes that held depths of sorrow and strength that belied her years. She carried herself with the dignity of someone who had known hardship but refused to be broken by it. "Are you hurt?" she asked, her voice soft but clear, cutting through the silence like a prayer. CC found himself speechless, not from the storm's aftermath, but from the unexpected presence of this mysterious woman who had appeared like an angel in his darkest hour. "No," he managed, his voice hoarse from shouting orders through the night. "Who are you? Where did you come from?" She looked around at the devastation, her eyes reflecting a sadness that matched his own. "I was traveling through when the storm hit. I took shelter in your barn." She paused, studying his face with an intensity that made him uncomfortable. "I'm sorry about your loss." There was something in her voice, a knowing quality that suggested she understood loss in a way that few people did. CC felt a strange stirring in his chest, a sensation he hadn't experienced in years. Here, in the ruins of everything he'd built, stood a woman who seemed to embody both the destruction and the hope of starting anew. The morning sun cast long shadows across the devastated ranch as CC walked alongside the mysterious woman, surveying the extent of his losses. With each step, the reality of his situation became clearer and more devastating. Fences lay twisted and broken, the barn roof had partially collapsed, and debris was scattered as far as the eye could see. But somehow, having this stranger beside him made the overwhelming task ahead seem less insurmountable. "What's your name?" he asked, as they paused beside what remained of his prize bullpen. She hesitated, her fingers unconsciously touching a small locket at her throat. "Maya," she said finally, though something in her voice suggested it might not be the whole truth. "Maya Rodriguez." CC nodded, accepting the name without question. In the frontier, people often carried secrets, and he'd learned long ago not to pry too deeply into a person's past. What mattered was who they were in the present moment, and Maya Rodriguez had appeared when he needed help most. Tom Bradley rode up on his mud-splattered horse, his face grim. "Boss, it's worse than we thought. We've lost near 3/4 of the herd. The rest are scattered from here to Kingdom Come." He glanced curiously at Maya, tipping his hat respectfully. "Ma'am?" CC felt the weight of 23 years of work crashing down on him. 3/4 of 15,000 head meant financial ruin. The banknotes, the equipment loans, the wages he owed his men, everything depended on those cattle. "Any of the boys hurt?" he asked, though his voice sounded hollow even to his own ears. "Jake's got a broken arm, and Pete's nursing some bruised ribs, but everybody's alive. That's more than we had a right to expect." Tom's eyes moved between CC and Maya again. "What do you want us to do about the cattle?" Maya stepped forward, surprising both men. "If I may suggest, Mr. Slaughter, you should organize search parties. Cattle often cluster together after a storm, seeking shelter and safety. They're probably not as scattered as you think." CC looked at her with new interest. "You seem to know something about ranching." A shadow crossed her face. "I've seen storms before. I know how animals behave." There was a story there, CC realized, but now wasn't the time to explore it. "Tom, organize the men into groups. Start with the draws and canyons to the south. Maya's right. They'll be looking for shelter." As Tom rode away, CC found himself alone with Maya again. She was studying the house, her expression thoughtful. "You built all this yourself?" she asked. "Started with nothing but a dream and $100 23 years ago," he said, pride creeping into his voice despite the circumstances. "Bought my first 10 head of cattle with that money and never looked back. And now," she turned to face him, her dark eyes reflecting a compassion that caught him off guard. "Now I might lose it all. The bank payments, the men's wages, everything depends on those cattle." He kicked at a piece of broken fence post. "Samuel Pierce has been circling like a vulture for years, waiting for something like this." Maya's expression hardened at the mention of Pierce's name, though CC didn't notice. "You won't lose it," she said with quiet conviction. "Men like you don't build something like this just to let it slip away." There was something in her tone that made him believe her, even though logic told him otherwise. "You don't know me," he said, but without conviction. "I know enough." She moved closer, and he caught a faint scent of wildflowers despite the mud and rain. "I know you stayed out all night making sure your men were safe. I know you're more worried about their welfare than your own losses. That tells me everything I need to know." CC felt something shift inside him, a crack in the wall he'd built around his heart after his wife's death 15 years ago. "Where will you go?" he asked. "When the road's clear, I mean." Maya looked across the devastated landscape, her expression unreadable. "I haven't decided yet. Maybe I'll stay and help with the cleanup. You'll need all the hands you can get." "I can't pay you," he said honestly. "I can barely pay the men I already have." "Did I ask for payment?" She smiled, and for the first time since the storm, CC felt something like hope stirring in his chest. "Besides, I have nowhere else to be." As if summoned by their conversation, a shout echoed across the valley. Tom was riding back, and behind him came 3 of the ranch hands, driving a small group of cattle. "Found about 50 head in Miller's Canyon," Tom called out. "They're spooked but alive." CC felt a surge of relief. 50 head wasn't much, but it was a start. Maya touched his arm gently. "See, it's not over yet." And for the first time since the storm hit, CC Slaughter allowed himself to believe that might be true. 3 days had passed since the storm, and the search parties had recovered nearly 800 head of cattle. It wasn't enough to save the ranch, but it was enough to give CC hope. Maya had proven invaluable, her knowledge of animal behavior helping the men locate clusters of frightened cattle in the most unlikely places. She worked alongside the cowboys without complaint, her presence somehow calming both the men and the animals. CC found himself watching her more than he should, drawn to the quiet strength she displayed in everything she did. She never spoke of her past, but he could see it in the way she moved, the way she handled the horses, the way she seemed to anticipate trouble before it arrived. There was a story there, and he was beginning to realize he desperately wanted to know what it was. "Found another group by Cedar Creek, Jake announced as he rode in, his broken arm still in a sling, but his spirits higher than they'd been in days. "Maybe 60 head, all bunched up under that old oak stand." Maya looked up from where she was tending to a calf with the injured leg. "That's good news. How many does that bring our total to?" CC did the math in his head. "About 900. Still not enough to meet the bank payment, but better than I dared hope 3 days ago." The sound of approaching horses drew their attention. Samuel Pierce rode into the ranch yard, flanked by 2 of his men, his expensive suit somehow still pristine despite the muddy conditions. Pierce was a man who'd never worked a day in his life, inheriting his father's bank and using it to acquire land from desperate ranchers. His pale eyes surveyed the damage with barely concealed satisfaction. "Slaughter," he said, dismounting with practiced arrogance. "I heard about your troubles. Terrible business losing cattle like that." CC felt his jaw tighten. "What do you want, Pierce?" "Just being neighborly." Pierce's smile was as cold as winter wind. "I know you've got payments coming due, and with most of your herd scattered to the winds, well," he spread his hands in a gesture of false sympathy, "I'm prepared to make you a fair offer for the land. Cash money, enough to pay off your debts and leave you something to start over somewhere else." Maya stepped closer to CC, her presence a source of unexpected strength. "The cattle aren't all lost," she said quietly. "We've recovered nearly 1,000 head." Pierce's eyes shifted to Maya, and CC saw something flicker across the banker's face. Surprise, perhaps, or something darker. "And you are?" Pierce asked, his tone carefully neutral. "A friend," Maya replied simply, but CC noticed her hand move instinctively to the locket at her throat. "Well, Miss Friend, 1,000 head won't cover what Slaughter owes. The payment's $15,000 due in 2 weeks. Pierce turned back to CC. "My offer stands. 10,000 cash, and you walk away free and clear." "I'm not walking away," CC said firmly. "This is my land, my life's work. I'll find a way to make the payment." Pierce shrugged, but his eyes remained cold. "Suit yourself, but when you can't make the payment, remember I tried to help." He remounted his horse, but before leaving, his gaze lingered on Maya one more time. "Funny thing about storms," he said. "They don't just destroy things. Sometimes they wash up things that were supposed to stay buried." After Pierce left, Maya was quiet for a long time. CC wanted to ask her about the banker's cryptic comment, but something in her expression warned him away. Instead, he focused on the work at hand, though he couldn't shake the feeling that there was more to Maya's story than she was letting on. That evening, as they sat on the porch watching the sunset paint the sky in shades of gold and crimson, Maya finally spoke. "Mr. Slaughter, there's something you should know about me." CC felt his heart skip. "What is it?" She was quiet for so long he thought she might not answer. When she finally spoke, her voice was barely above a whisper. "My real name isn't Maya Rodriguez. It's Maya Pierce." The words hit him like a physical blow. "Pierce, as in Samuel Pierce." She nodded, tears glistening in her eyes. "He's my father." CC felt the world tilt around him. The woman who had appeared like an angel in his darkest hour, who had given him hope and stirred feelings he thought long dead, was the daughter of his greatest enemy. "Why didn't you tell me?" he asked, though his voice was surprisingly gentle. "Because I knew you wouldn't trust me, and because..." She looked at him with eyes full of pain. "Because I'm not like him. I ran away from that life 2 years ago, and I've been running ever since." CC studied her face in the fading light, seeing the truth in her eyes. "What happened 2 years ago?" "I discovered something about my father that I couldn't live with, something that made me realize I had to get away from him, no matter what it cost." The weight of her revelation settled between them. But instead of pushing her away, CC found himself drawn to her courage. "Are you still running?" he asked. Maya met his gaze steadily. "I was, until I met you." In that moment, CC realized that his heart had already made its choice, regardless of her parentage. The question was whether he was brave enough to follow it. The revelation of Maya's true identity hung between them like a thundercloud, but CC found that it changed nothing about how he felt. If anything, knowing that she had chosen to leave her father's wealth and comfort to live on her own terms only deepened his respect for her. Over the next week, they worked side by side, recovering more cattle and slowly beginning to rebuild what the storm had destroyed. The recovered herd now numbered nearly 1,200 head, still short of what was needed but closer than CC had dared hope. Maya proved to be more than just knowledgeable about cattle. She was a natural leader, organizing the men with quiet efficiency and somehow managing to keep morale high, despite the seemingly impossible task ahead. But Samuel Pierce wasn't content to wait passively for the payment deadline. He began applying pressure in subtle ways that spoke to his years of experience in destroying men who stood in his way. First came the suppliers, suddenly demanding immediate payment for feed and equipment. Then the neighboring ranchers began reporting that their cattle buyers were no longer interested in purchasing slaughter beef, citing concerns about the ranch's financial stability. "It's Pierce," Tom Bradley said grimly as he returned from town with news that their usual bank in San Antonio was now refusing to extend their line of credit. "He's got his fingers in every pie from here to Austin. Man's got a long reach when he wants to squeeze somebody." CC stood in his study, looking at the ledger books that told the story of his mounting debt. Even with the recovered cattle, he was still $3,000 short of making the payment. $3,000 might as well have been $3 million. Maya entered quietly, carrying a cup of coffee. She'd taken to bringing him coffee each evening as he worked on the books, a small gesture that had become precious to him. "How bad is it?" she asked, though her tone suggested she already knew. "Bad enough." He accepted the coffee gratefully, their fingers brushing as she handed him the cup. The touch sent a familiar warmth through him that he'd tried unsuccessfully to ignore. "Even if we sell every head we've recovered, we're still short?" Maya sat down across from him, her expression thoughtful. "There might be another way." CC looked up hopefully. "What do you mean?" She hesitated, and he could see her wrestling with some internal conflict. "My father didn't raise me to be helpless. I know things about his business, about how he operates. There are ways to fight him. I won't ask you to betray your father, Maya, no matter what he's done." She laughed, but there was no humor in it. "Betray him, Mr. Slaughter, CC. My father destroyed my mother's family ranch when I was 16, used the same tactics he's using on you now, drove them into bankruptcy and bought their land for pennies on the dollar. My mother never got over losing the home where she was born." CC felt anger rising in his chest, not just at Pierce, but at the pain he could see in Maya's eyes. "Is that why you left?" "Part of it." She stood and moved to the window, looking out at the land that had become as important to her as it was to him. "I discovered that he'd been deliberately creating situations to force ranchers into default, bribing cattle buyers, intimidating suppliers, even sabotaging operations when subtlety didn't work. Can you prove it?" Maya turned back to him, and he saw a determination in her eyes that reminded him of steel. "I have documents, letters, financial records, proof of bribes. I took them when I left, thinking someday I might need them. Why haven't you used them before now?" "Because I was afraid. Because exposing him would mean destroying the only family I have left." She moved closer to his desk, her hands gripping the back of the chair. "But I can't stand by and watch him destroy you the way he destroyed my mother's family." CC stood, moved by her courage and the sacrifice she was offering to make. "Maya, you don't have to do this for me." "Yes, I do." Her voice was quiet but firm. "Because somewhere in the last 2 weeks, this stopped being about you and became about us." The words hung in the air between them, an admission that changed everything. CC came around the desk, stopping just in front of her. "Maya, I know it's complicated," she said quickly. "I know my being Pierce's daughter makes everything harder, but I can't pretend I don't feel what I feel." CC reached out, gently touching her face. "And what do you feel?" "That I've been running my whole life, and for the first time, I've found a place I want to stay." Before he could respond, the sound of approaching horses interrupted them. Tom Bradley's voice called out urgently from the yard. "Boss, you need to see this!" They rushed outside to find Tom holding a legal document, his face grim. "Just came from town. Pierce has filed a lawsuit claiming you owe him money on a personal loan. Says he wants immediate possession of the ranch as collateral." Maya snatched the document, scanning it quickly. Her face went pale. "This is a forgery. The signature, the dates, none of this is real." CC felt the walls closing in around him. "Real or not, it'll tie things up in court long enough for him to take possession." Maya looked at the forged document, then at CC, and he saw her make a decision that would change both their lives forever. Then it's time to stop running and start fighting back. Maya rode into town the next morning with a determination that surprised even herself. For 2 years, she had carried the weight of her father's crimes in silence, but watching him target CC with the same ruthless tactics had awakened something fierce within her. She knew exactly where her father kept his private papers, and more importantly, she knew his weaknesses. The Pierce banking house stood like a monument to greed in the center of town, its imposing facade designed to intimidate those who sought loans they desperately needed. Maya walked through the front doors with the confidence of someone who belonged there, nodding to the clerks who remembered her as the banker's daughter. Samuel Pierce looked up from his desk as she entered his office, his surprise quickly masked by cold calculation. "Maya, I wondered when you'd come crawling back." "I'm not crawling anywhere, Father." She placed a leather satchel on his desk with deliberate precision. "I'm here to make you an offer. Q." Pierce leaned back in his chair, studying her with the same predatory gaze he used on desperate ranchers. "And what could you possibly offer me that I don't already have?" Maya opened the satchel and withdrew a thick bundle of documents. "Your freedom." Pierce's expression didn't change, but she saw his hands tense slightly. "I don't know what you think you have there, but letters to cattle buyers, offering them bribes to refuse slaughter beef, financial records showing payments to suppliers for delayed deliveries, documentation of at least 6 other ranches you've deliberately driven into bankruptcy." Maya's voice was steady, but inside her heart was racing. "And the forged loan document you had delivered to CC yesterday." For the first time in her life, Maya saw genuine fear flicker across her father's face. Those documents were stolen. Any court would throw them out as inadmissible. Maybe, but the newspapers wouldn't care about admissibility. Neither would your other clients when they realized how you've been manipulating the market. Maya leaned forward, meeting his gaze directly. "How many legitimate ranchers do you think will keep their money in a bank run by a proven criminal?" Pierce stood abruptly, moving to the window that overlooked the town square. "What do you want?" "Drop the lawsuit against CC Slaughter, forgive his debt, and leave him alone. And in return, I'll give you the documents and disappear from your life forever." Pierce turned back to her, and for a moment she saw something that might have been regret in his eyes. "You're willing to sacrifice your inheritance, your future, for a man you've known for 2 weeks. I'm willing to sacrifice it for my own soul." Maya gathered the documents back into the satchel. "I've lived with the knowledge of what you are for too long. If I don't stop you now, I'm as guilty as you are." "He's using you, Maya. Men like Slaughter only see dollar signs when they look at a woman." Maya felt anger flare within her. "The only person who's ever used me is sitting behind that desk. CC doesn't even know I'm here." Pierce moved back to his desk, his businessman's mask slipping back into place. "Suppose I agree to your terms. What guarantee do I have that you won't use those documents against me later? Because unlike you, Father, when I give my word, I keep it." The silence stretched between them, filled with years of disappointment and betrayal. Finally, Pierce opened his desk drawer and withdrew the forged loan document. With deliberate movements, he tore it in half. The lawsuit will be dropped by tomorrow morning. Slaughter's debt is forgiven. Maya felt a wave of relief wash over her, but she kept her expression neutral. And you'll leave him alone. No more interference with his business. As long as he stays away from my daughter. Pierce's voice carried a threat that chilled her. I'm not your daughter anymore. Maya placed the satchel on his desk and turned toward the door. I haven't been for a long time. Maya. Pierce's voice stopped her at the threshold. You're making a mistake. That man will never be able to give you the life you deserve. She looked back at him one last time, seeing not the father who had raised her, but the cold businessman who had destroyed so many lives. The life I deserve is the one I choose for myself. As she walked out of the bank, Maya felt as though a weight she'd been carrying for years had finally been lifted from her shoulders. She had chosen love over security, truth over comfort, and for the first time in her life, she felt truly free. Now she just had to hope that Cece would understand the choice she'd made. Cece was mending fence when Maya returned, but something in her posture told him immediately that everything had changed. She dismounted her horse with the fluid grace he'd come to admire, but there was a lightness to her movements that hadn't been there before, as if she'd finally set down a burden she'd been carrying for too long. It's done, she said simply, walking toward him across the pasture where cattle grazed peacefully in the afternoon sun. What's done? He asked, though his heart was already beginning to hope. The lawsuit, the debt, all of it. My father has agreed to leave you alone. Cece set down his tools, studying her face. What did you do, Maya? She told him everything, holding nothing back. About the documents, the confrontation with her father, the choice she'd made to sacrifice her inheritance for his freedom. When she finished, Cece was quiet for a long time, processing the magnitude of what she'd done for him. You gave up everything, he said finally. I gave up nothing that mattered. Maya stepped closer, her eyes reflecting the golden light of the setting sun. I chose what I wanted most. Cece reached for her hands, marveling at how perfectly they fit in his. And what's that? A chance to build something real with someone who sees me for who I truly am, not who my father is or what my name represents. She smiled, and he felt his heart skip in response. A chance to belong somewhere with someone who matters. Maya Pierce. Maya Rodriguez, she corrected gently. Maya Pierce died in that bank office. I'm just Maya now, if you'll have me. Cece pulled her closer, his weathered hands framing her face with infinite tenderness. I'll have you for as long as you'll stay. Forever sounds about right, she whispered. Their kiss was gentle at first, then deeper, filled with the promise of all the tomorrows they would build together. Around them, the ranch that had nearly been lost was already showing signs of renewal. New fences, recovered cattle, and most importantly, hope where despair had once lived. Tom Bradley rode up, grinning broadly. Boss, just got word from town. Pierce's man delivered papers dropping all claims against the ranch. We're free and clear. Cece never took his eyes off Maya. Yes, we are. 6 months later, the ranch was thriving again. Cece had expanded into horse breeding, with Maya's help, her knowledge of bloodlines proving invaluable. They'd married in a simple ceremony, attended by the ranch hands and the townspeople who had come to respect the woman who had chosen love over luxury. The house rang with laughter now, filled with the warmth that only comes when two people find their perfect match. Maya had transformed not just Cece's heart, but his entire world, bringing light to corners that had been dark for far too long. Sometimes, in the evening when they sat on the porch watching the sunset paint the sky in brilliant colors, Cece would remember the night of the storm that had nearly destroyed everything he'd built. He'd lost most of his cattle that night, but he'd gained something infinitely more precious. Any regrets? He asked Maya one evening as she leaned against his shoulder. Only that it took a storm to bring us together, she replied, her hand finding his. Though I suppose the best things in life are worth waiting for. Cece smiled, thinking about the mysterious ways that fate worked. He'd spent 23 years building an empire only to discover that true wealth had nothing to do with cattle or land. It had everything to do with finding someone who saw past your failures to the man you could become. The storm had taken his herd, but it had given him his heart's desire, and Christopher Columbus Slaughter had never felt richer in his life.